there are renegotiations with ourselves throughout our lives, right? Where we recommit to this work. Sometimes the reasons for our work in the social justice space change. For right now, for me, it's all the things I mentioned. And also, it's a lot about community, right? Seeing my friends being attacked in different ways or navigating their challenges, and also being a not new now, but first time mom wanting to protect my child, right? And leave a better world for him. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, like in terms of being drawn to social justice. This is my theory, right? Or way to explain it, but it's very personal, right? Whether you grew up as a member of a marginalized community or had a very personal interaction with something or somebody that shaped your life in such a way that you were drawn to that path. And sometimes I think it just takes a lot of work and self exploration, therapy, professional development training, just sitting down with yourself to understand like why you want to do what you want to do. Right. And I think for me, that's why I say it wasn't necessarily one thing. I think a lot of people have a defining moment or circumstance that places them on that path. For me, it was more of a feeling or inclination or almost like a magnetism that I've had to dig more into over time and understand why am I drawn to this? What do I want to do in a way that's authentic, right? So for me, when I initially started out working in social justice nonprofits, it was more at the high level of like, I want to do good in the world, right? And I think that's a great feeling to have. And I think the more you get into the work and the more personal it becomes and the harder it becomes, we have to really understand what's behind that and also dig into like why us, right? So for me, that's been a big exploration over particularly the past 5 years, I would say, maybe more than that, of what does it mean for me to hold these dual identities of being white and also Muslim,
Right.
in a place of power and also in privilege and also discrimination. Like it's a very strange place at times. And I've had to come, it's what's the word, like a cognitive dissonance almost at some times. And I've had to really do a lot of deep work, both myself and professionals with friends to understand that identity in order to access the social justice work in a way that's meaningful and authentic to, again, that plugs the vision as an individual into the best needs of PD and into the system. And I think sometimes if you're just starting out or you don't have that personal understanding, it can stay at that high level, like, yeah, I want to do good. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think as your journey goes on, it's important to constantly ask yourself those questions. Like, why am I doing this? What draws me to it? What's my goal? What if I don't achieve something that is tangible or that I can see? Is it still going to be meaningful? Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's just this. eh, And again, life happens, right? Maybe you become a parent or like, you lose your job, you do this, you do that, you're part of a natural disaster, whatever it is, and things change for you, right? And you have to be just in a good relationship with yourself to understand that in order to plug into the work in the best way that you could be. Understanding your place in the ecosystem is one of the things this taught me, right? So I've always struggled throughout my career with like, I'm not a frontline activist organizer person. I'm just not. Like, it's not who I am. It's not my personality. It's not where my skill set is. And doing the exploration to understand where your skill set is and then owning that and growing into it. It's not to say you can't change over time. Lots of people have career changes or even with us in the same sector. But like, they're all valuable, right? And I think sometimes, a lot of times in social justice, we think of like the sexy organizer, policy, advocacy person, this and that. And we disregard the people who are working in finance or administration who are keeping these things going, right?
Well,
Fundraising. For me, it's been more of the behind the scenes, right? In program officer or as a consultant, right? I'm not in the halls of Congress, right? But I'm helping maybe get the funding or some of the ideas, or I'm bringing a group together who don't know each other, right? Playing a connector role, that kind of thing. So, I think really valuing and not discounting whatever your work is, because we need all of those people and no one is like higher in the hierarchy, right? all these personalities we read about in history, or all the people who changed the world, there were systems behind this, right? To be able to do that. And so even if you're not the person, you're part of that system, and that's really important.
This is Social Justice Origin Stories. I'm your host, Rolando Tompkins Jones. Social Justice Origin Stories is a storytelling project that highlights personal stories and defining moments that have inspired individuals and organizations to labor for equity and social justice. Through truth-telling, the honest sharing of their experiences, storytellers teach us about themselves, enabling us to learn about ourselves and our world through their stories. By reconnecting with pivotal moments of activation in their lives, they invite us to do the same. At Social Justice Origin Stories, we believe that there's power in storytelling, and lived experience is experience. There's room enough for all of us to do this work. There are many ways to contribute, and our contributions don't need to be the same. We can enter and remain engaged in the work using the gifts that are special to us while supporting others and using theirs. We have the capacity to grow and change for the better when exposed to new information and experiences. We believe in our inherent worth and capabilities, and we possess the power to inspire and create change within ourselves and others. We can transcend the confines of the status quo to imagine and design more equitable and humanizing systems. Claire Downing. Claire, thank you so much for coming to share your social justice origin story with us. Claire, not only are you a very genuine, sincere person, you have an ability to show up as both a mirror and a window, not just to individuals, but then to organizations as well. I often talk about in my own work, using education to lessen the distance between who we are saying that we are to people as individuals, as organizations, as communities. So lessen that gap between who we're saying that we are and then how the results of our actions are actually impacting the folks that we say we want to show up for. And Claire, you have such a great ability to show up in spaces, asking the questions, naming the things, making the things that are implied explicit so that we all have some shared understanding about what's actually taking place here, asking questions that other folks may have, the courage to say and do the hard things. So I've always appreciated that about you, Claire, the ability to support people in spaces and organizations. And, hey, are these decisions that we are making truly living up to the values that we have put forward in terms of who we want to be?
You're making me literally, I was like tearing up before we even started talking. So I have to compose myself. But no, that's a beautiful, thank you, Rolando. Thank you. That's beautiful. So grateful and happy to be here with you and your listeners. Thank you for having me. So I'm Claire Downing. I am a person who wears many hats professionally and personally, but professionally, I'll start with I have spent about the last 10 years of my career in the racial equity and social justice space with nonprofits, as well as in philanthropy and racial and social justice consulting. About a year ago, I started my own, it's right now solo consulting, but we'll see what happens in the future. But I started my own little venture called the Moonlight Collaborative. That came out of a negative experience of being laid off, but was something that really allowed me to explore and spread my wings of what felt most true to me at this moment. And so after all those other professional experiences, I've really been digging deep into what calls me most in the social justice and racial equity space, combining my love for those topics and my deep passion with my academic background in conflict resolution, which we could all use a lot of right now. So it's been an interesting journey. I'm working with still nonprofits and funders across the country. My expertise beyond what I've mentioned is in working with faith communities, particularly Muslim and allied communities. So I have a lot of experience there and just bring all that to my work. So right now, yeah, in the solo consulting space, other than that, I'm a PhD candidate, still trying to finish up that dissertation, looking at the negative impacts of surveillance and counterterrorism on communities in the US. I'm a first-time mom to a toddler. So lots of stuff just going on. And I'm here in the DC metro area. I live in Northern Virginia. So coming to you today with, as lots of us are, lots of heaviness on the heart, just found out another friend is getting laid off. And, there's just lots swirling for all of us really in different ways. So just holding that as well. But yeah, I, again, thank you for the opportunity, Rolando. Can't wait to get more into it.
Lots of things swirling for us. I was just on a call with someone the other day, just being reminded that History is always happening, and at each and every moment, there are always folks who are resisting. Even now, the time we are spending together, I think, is a part of that history of telling stories of
Absolutely.
resistance in ways that support folks who are doing the work. Hoping that the things that
Absolutely.
you hear today will provide some connection, some sense of refueling, reinvigoration, and just a reminder that you're not alone here today. So thank you again, Claire, for being a part of this. So one of the questions that I often start these off with, it's a quote from Corey Bush that says, "Many of us do not choose to become activists. Instead, we are activated." And so when you think of your own social justice origin stories that you want to share with us today, what are some things that activated you?
Yeah, I love that quote so much. I think it was talking to someone the other day about this, about how so many of us wouldn't even include the word activist or leader or anything in our bios. It's just something that's come either from destiny or circumstance, or maybe a mix of both. And we felt pushed into this work or drawn into it in one way or another. For me, I think it's a few things. I think really I think we'll get more into this in the conversation, but faith is a big driving factor for me in the way I live my life, and also the kind of work that I want to do and the impact I want to leave when I pass on eventually. So for me, that's definitely a driving factor. And that started even before I was born. So I'm a Muslim convert. We'll talk more about that. But even within my own family, there were lots of seeds of change, people bucking norms and going their different ways, at least in the faith realm. So my mom's side of the family is originally from Ukraine and Russia, and my mom's family grew up conservative Orthodox Jewish, and my dad's family is Christian. They come from Western Europe, like England, Germany. And so even my grandfather and grandmother on my mom's side, my grandfather was pretty Orthodox and my grandmother was more Reform. And so they made a household of compromising and navigating that complexity in an environment in the 50s and 60s. And then my mom and dad got married, and that was another layer of navigation, a Christian and Jewish family navigating those dynamics. And my sister and I, we grew up Jewish, and then I began sort of navigating my identity and faith when I was a late teenager, early adult, and fell into Islam and really embraced it and loved it. And it's been really the guiding thing in my life that draws me to social justice and racial equity work. But again, started these changes and people learning to live with difference, faith difference and cultural difference, started long before I was born. So that's for me why I say both destiny and also circumstance. So I think part of the fire that was sparked for me was in that way, way before I was born. And then for me, I became Muslim in 2010, really started reading and exploring the tenets of the faith, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, many other faith leaders. Of course, we have Malcolm X, others, many converts, in fact, like myself, who have dedicated their lives to making the world a better place in the name of faith and bettering humanity, right? You don't have to be a person of faith to do this work, but there have been many in different faith traditions throughout time that have taken on that work. So really began an exploration of that and became increasingly drawn to doing good in the world. I didn't know what that meant at first, right? I had different journeys, but for me, leading up to 2016, many attacks on many communities, again, not new in 2016, it's been going on for generations, but it really pushed me further into I want to commit myself to this work and this journey. And that's where I more formally entered the social justice space in social justice philanthropy, working with Muslim communities. So I don't know that there was one event. It was more an evolution, a personal journey, a reckoning with myself about what was my place as a white person, but also someone who is impacted by structural violence and inequity, wearing hijab, being visibly Muslim, and being part of this community. So yeah, lots more to I dig into there, but it's been a long journey and it continues. There are renegotiations with ourselves throughout our lives, right, where we recommit to this work. Sometimes the reasons for our work in the social justice space change. For right now, for me, it's all the things I mentioned, and also it's a lot about community, right? Seeing my friends being attacked in different ways or navigating their challenges, and also being a not new now, but first time mom wanting to protect my child, right? And leave a better world for him.
You share it's a journey. I also heard you say we recommit to the work in different ways or for different reasons. I had a question there. What's the significance of that for you?
I think for me, I've been thinking a lot about this lately, like in terms of being drawn to social justice. This is my theory, right? Or way to explain it, but it's very personal, right? Whether you grew up as a member of a marginalized community or had a very personal interaction with something or somebody that shaped your life in such a way that you were drawn to that path. And sometimes I think it just takes a lot of work and self exploration, therapy, professional development training, just sitting down with yourself to understand like why you want to do what you want to do. Right. And I think for me, that's why I say it wasn't necessarily one thing. I think a lot of people have a defining moment or circumstance that places them on that path. For me, it was more of a feeling or inclination or almost like a magnetism that I've had to dig more into over time and understand why am I drawn to this? What do I want to do in a way that's authentic, right? So for me, when I initially started out working in social justice nonprofits, it was more at the high level of like, I want to do good in the world, right? And I think that's a great feeling to have. And I think the more you get into the work and the more personal it becomes and the harder it becomes, we have to really understand what's behind that and also dig into like why us, right? So for me, that's been a big exploration over particularly the past 5 years, I would say, maybe more than that, of what does it mean for me to hold these dual identities of being white and also Muslim, like in a place of power and also in privilege and also discrimination. Like it's a very strange place at times. And I've had to come, it's what's the word, like a cognitive dissonance almost at some times. And I've had to really do a lot of deep work, both myself and professionals with friends to understand that identity in order to access the social justice work in a way that's meaningful and authentic to, again, that plugs the vision as an individual into the best and its LPD and into the system. And like called deeper items, it such a best of the ecosystem. We all have roles, etc. And I think sometimes if you're just starting out or you don't have that real like personal understanding, it can stay at that high level, like, yeah, I want to do good. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think as your journey goes on, it's important to constantly ask yourself those questions. Like, why am I doing this? What draws me to it? What's my goal? What if I don't achieve something that is tangible or that I can see? Is it still going to be meaningful? Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's just this. And again, life happens, right? Maybe you become a parent or like, you lose your job, you do this, you do that, you're part of a natural disaster, whatever it is, like, and things change for you, right? And you have to be just in a good relationship with yourself to understand that in order to plug into the work in the best way that you could be. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, and I appreciate you naming a couple of things. The social change ecosystem is one. I'm a big admirer of that. It resonates a lot with me. Even what we're doing now, storytelling, that's one of the ways to be a part of that system. I also liked how you shared that, hey, some people might have this singular thing, but for you, it's not a singular thing. It's sort of a collection of lots of experiences. And I'd say for folks who are out there listening and hearing you say that, you're probably in good company because I'm sure that resonates with a lot of folks too. It's lots of different things that contributed to this, which is important too. In preparation for us talking here, some other themes that came up. You named your parents' work. You talked a little bit about your conversion to Islam, toxic workplaces, racial justice movement work post 9/11, and particularly in the wake of the 2016 election.
When I was sort of searching for a career path, even in high school, like I didn't really know what it was not to do something that, like, quote unquote, left the world a better place, right?
Yeah.
I was surprised to find out, right? Like, I don't know, it's like late bloomer in this way, but that there were things like capitalism and making money for money's sake. And it's not to say I didn't grow up well off and all of that, but that there was something other to do in your life than like do good. And so my dad has still working to this day, thankfully still has his job, but is in the international development sector. He spent most of his career in the international development sector. He has done some really, really interesting work in our conversation. I know there's rightfully so lots of criticism of the international aid sector, which I share, but I think, his work comes from a real genuine place. My dad live in other places for years, like makes friends and community in the places that he is. Spent a lot of time in West Bank, in Liberia, other places. Really, kind of embeds himself, which I appreciate. But anyway, has spent a long career in that sector, which sparks some of my interest. She's retired now, but she started her career in legal aid in Appalachia and went on to start in different legal capacities in nonprofits and ended up career at the DC bar. So she is getting a different way, right, to equity, to access, to helping folks. And so I think, again, that was like the norm for me. And also, I think growing up in the DC metro area, I've had a lot of friends who, parents, I guess, who were in that type of, the private sector. So it was just normal for me to sort of think of that as like, well, that's what you do, right? You're like, I have relatives who are teachers, right? You're a teacher, or you're a servant, right? You're a servant leader, right? And that's what I thought of. So that's one aspect. Yeah, so just really, really embedded in my, genealogy is the right word, but that my familiar pattern. And then I think from a faith aspect, I'm doing my PhD work now on surveillance and counterterrorism and how just, I mean, there's no right word to describe how bad it's been in so many ways, but really, like, I think continue to see there's different levels of impact on our communities, on the Muslim and allied communities of surveillance and counterterrorism. I think I'm most interested and feel connected the most, have most experience with sort of these soft, if you will, everyday types of things that people from marginalized communities experience. So, again, from a perspective, right? Going to the airport and getting that extra scan gets me every time, right? It doesn't ever get less. I'm sure you've experienced that. Well, it never gets easier or less frightening. I remember at Trump 1.0 memorizing the number of lawyer in our community space at work in case I got wrongfully detained at the airport. And experiencing those things in just the way that those types of things just infiltrate your everyday life. So for me, going on a work trip and being pulled aside, having my bag searched, right? And then having to go to work and like do a presentation or be a part of a panel or a discussion with colleagues. And that's it's a non-violent, it's a non-violent action, but it's still like attack on your autonomy and your body, right? And so I think those types of experiences that started ramping up for me, and also, of course, post 9/11, but for me personally, more leading up to and then after the election, Trump 1.0, were radicalizing aspects of my journey. I think a lot about dignity in my work. I think a lot about what is it to live with rights if you don't have dignity, right? And so I think, yes, I have the right to sue the TSA if I feel I'm wrongfully searched, right? Or if I'm pulled aside on the basis of my religion or my appearance, etc. But like, that doesn't do much so that something doesn't happen to me. Again, that's a small nonviolent example. It's just the ways in which we navigate our complexities on a day-to-day basis, but the way those sort of draw you down. Again, that's a lot related to my PhD work, but something we hear a lot about these huge executive orders and the big things in those, but we don't hear a lot about like the everyday microaggressions and things that happen to folks that really just wear you down, right? And so I'm drawn to fighting those. You mentioned, it kind of alluded to like saying things in the workplace, right? And that's the type of stance I take, where it's like, people want to fight back about the big things, and that's great. But like, I think the little things are really important too.
The little things are really important too. As you were just telling your story, I'm also thinking of the cumulative impact, right? You said, they also weigh down on you too. So, that experience where you're going through the airport or you're searched or having to remember the number of your lawyer in case you're wrongfully detained. But then also there's that element of And I'm sure folks who are listening, folks may be able to resonate in one way or another to that element of still having to continue to just go on though. So it's like, oh yeah, but then I got a presentation and I got to talk in front of these people. And, sometimes there's the space to move into environments with that context. And then sometimes depending on the setting, there can also be that pressure to just move on as if nothing has happened yet. We've had these experiences. That's a part of what we're carrying into the space. And so when you say thinking about the microaggressions and people speak up for the big things, but then the little things too, because those things add up, it's that cumulative impact and it's heavy, it ends up creating quite a weight for us to navigate in different ways.
For sure.
Yeah. You did have the theme of toxic workplaces here to whatever degree you wanted to share and talk about how that contributes to your social justice origin story, your passion for social justice.
Ooh, where do we start? No, I mean, I think one of the first experiences I had that was so transformative, and I still think about it all the time, is this was earlier on in my career, but I was working in what is now like a pretty renowned social justice organization. Back then it was still like pretty new and doing amazing, groundbreaking, award-winning work. Anyway, I won't mention too much, but doing incredible work in the ecosystem in the world, if you will, and had a horrible toxic work culture. And I'll just we so many of us have been in that place, but really got me thinking about like, well, why, like, we have all these values that we're talking about, we're doing this great, programming in this country, in this country, in the US, and this whatever, but like, why are the employees treated so badly? And then, living in this area, going to school in this area with so many people in the nonprofit, particularly, also other sectors, government, but who again have that drive to do good in the world, whatever that means to them. So many of them have experienced, oh, this big name organization, they're amazing, but oh my God, I was harassed, or I was, this happened to me there. And just was such a, again, I'll use the word cognitive dissonance to me that early on in my
Yeah.
career that I've taken with me to every other workplace of like, wait a minute, let's stop here and examine, right? What do our values and our work really mean if we can't treat each other properly, right? I think we talk about, in philanthropy or in social justice work, right? Accountability to partners, accountability to community, et cetera. But what about the accountability to ourselves and our colleagues, right? I mean, those are our community too in a different way. And as I get more bolden in my approach, maybe older, maybe further along in my career, I just don't want to stand for that anymore. And I don't think anyone should. But, I try to use my social capital wherever I am, relationship or tenure or, privilege, to speak out against that. And that also comes up in my consulting work, past and present, where, you're doing a strategic plan or an evaluation or whatever it is. And again, it's just these lofty ideas and this great work. And then you're finding out from folks in the organization or your own colleagues that there's this big elephant in the room or a small elephant. It doesn't matter. Like, there's all this stuff going on. You can't have the basis for liberation built on oppression. Like you can't. You have to fix your own house, right? Fix your
Yeah.
fix
Yeah.
your fix your corner of the world before you want to go out to whatever country it is and do some great stuff. So I don't know. That's something I just kind of stumbled into by experience, but I think it's such an important part of the work. And that's why now with my own consulting, I tell clients, right, I will bring in principles of conflict resolution, right? When I work with you, we have to establish a good working relationship, rapport. We have to be honest with each other. We don't have to be friends or, text each other, whatever, but like we need to know that there's certain things we're going to stand for and not stand for. And we're going to hold each other accountable and be honest about when those things don't happen. So, I've just seen so many projects like go wrong where the work and the values or the outcome and the values don't, or the behavior and the values don't line up. And these toxic organizations that we've all been in are just a microcosm of what else is happening in the world. And I think we're seeing the fallout of it too. I know there was a lot of like post 2016, post Me Too, right? A lot of organizations had just so much turmoil, particularly in the nonprofit sector. And it weakens movements, right? It weakens our ability to show up for each other, to have that solidarity with people who are different from us when we're fighting these little wars on our own. So yeah, should have a whole podcast on that. I'm sure everyone who listens has their own experience in one way or another of a toxic workplace.
That's one of the elements I bring into working too. Motivated by Dr. King's always say to Americans, be true to what you say on paper. Got all the stuff
Yes.
written down about what it's supposed to mean, who we're supposed to be, but not everybody is experiencing that. And so how can we name those contradictions so we can then rectify them as that applies in a variety of different contexts. Individually, it applies as well as interpersonally, as well as organizationally and institutions.
I'm a big believer, again, like you don't have to have a faith or anything, but just that, God or the universe or whatever circumstance will bring you to what's yours and what your, like, I don't, as I mentioned, like losing my job, right? Being part of a layoff, right? That sucked. It still sucks. But like, I have what I have, which is wonderful and so much more in line with what I want to be doing and the person I want to be. And I feel like, again, I understanding my privilege and my circumstances, maybe it's easier for me to get up here and say, like, you have to give up opportunities sometimes. But I do believe that, right? I do believe that I do understand, right, that people are in much worse circumstance, the job market, the layoffs, all of that. So I'm not discounting that at all. But, just from a consulting perspective, right? Sometimes there will be a horribly toxic client and you're thinking about your bottom line. And that's so important. And also, I believe that you can't subject yourself to that. And that sometimes you have to give up on stuff that is not serving you or is damaging to your health or your family relationships or whatever it is. I think we have to just be honest about the type of person we want to be, the life we want to lead, and that the money will come, the success will come, the prestige will come, all of that. So that's my personal take. Again, I'm very sensitive to what's going on right now. And so I don't want to be glib about it. But I really admire people who have passed up opportunities or said to a client, like, yeah, we're not going to stand for that, or we're not going to work with you because you can't treat us like that, or we saw how you spoke to this person, we're not going to stand for it. And I think that's just how we have to treat each other, right?
Leadership matters. And I've talked with folks who have shared their stories with me as a part of this project. And one of the themes that comes up is on the other side of the things that we don't want to see, there are some signals and some values in terms of the things we do want to see or the ways that we do want to
Mm.
show up. And so for your storytelling, as you're sharing, it's also taking me back to some of your earlier sharing about like reflection, why me? Why am I in this? What type of person do I want to be? How do I want to, how can I be of service? And so I'm hearing in some of your sharing as well, a similar conversation around just being aware of, how am I spending my time? Is this in a way that is supportive and helpful, not just to me, but to others as well? Or do I need to make some pivots or some changes? And so appreciating your sharing that while also acknowledging the realities, the ways that we're situated differently, our relationship with power and privilege, and our experiences with oppression too. But the thing that is blaring in my mind right now, the word or the message is leadership matters. And so I I'm hoping to tie this together. I'm going to see if this ties together. So one of the things in terms of how your experiences have influenced your current work in activism and how your understanding has been shaped by those experiences. What's the story behind the name of your consulting business?
The Moonlight Collaborative, and it has a few different meanings to me. I searched and searched for a name that I felt would resonate with me and hopefully with folks who use my services. But for me, Moonlight is a few things. And again, preface this with this business came out of the very bad experience of being laid off and not just losing your job, but losing in a way that was just terrible. And, so spent a lot of like sleepless nights, as you can imagine, figuring out, right? Okay, so what am I going to do, not only income wise, but, what do I want to do with this sort of like newly blank space in my life? Lots and lots of thoughts come to you a lot at night. My brain tends to be very overactive at night. And so I think the first meaning of it, Moonlight, is just like this process of exploration and forming something new, sort of by the light of the moon, right? As we're laying in the dark. I think another meaning of it for me is about illumination, right? So thinking about my own expertise or what I bring in terms of backgrounds in evaluation working with clients to illuminate like what's special or significant about what we're doing. Again, whether it's like evaluation or strategic planning or something else, programming development. And then a third one for me is around my own identity. So my name, Claire, is French, and I love words that are, some sort of perfect personal significance there. And then like moon and moonlight are also, Holy Scripture and significant in Islam. So obviously, look, quite a lot of that. Collaborative is much more straightforward. For me, I wanted a practice that is not just me sort of advising or giving you a product. It's a collaboration, it's a partnership. I'm going to bring knowledge and expertise, and you as the client are also going to bring that. And I'm not going to like regurgitate something or hand you something on a platter. Like you're going to have to do the work with me, right? So it's this process of negotiation and co-learning, co-creation that I really hope to achieve and have been the best projects rather that I've been on throughout my career and rooted in value and partnership and relationship, right? Those are really important to me. So that's the long story about the name.
I just knew there was some intention in there. So thank you for sharing
Thank
the
you for
story of the
asking.
name,
Yeah.
and then also, uh, okay, separately, but I'll come back to my first question. You mentioned some things, collaboration. You're going to do the work with me, my clients. They bring knowledge. I bring knowledge as well. So it's a very collaborative, relational experience. What are some of the values that you bring or that inform your work? And I think you mentioned some of them as you were describing how you relate to your clients. But what are some of the values that inform the work that you do? And then also, what helps you to ensure that you stay true to those values
Mm.
over time?
Those are such great questions. So for me, I'll just mention a few values. I mean, I think there are some that should be not negotiable in our work. We've all seen them on slides, presentations that I feel like I don't need to mention, right? But, again, justice, equity, respect, that kind of thing, listening. So obviously all of those, I think what maybe sets me apart or maybe not, but things that I definitely bring to the practice. One is deep exploration. So I am someone who sort of throughout my career and also just in my practice, particularly in evaluation, but in other areas as well, I have the sense, I guess, I don't know why, but of both like the 30,000 foot as you will, and the like deep importance of details and personal anecdotes and stories. And so one example, and I'll tell my clients this too, like, again, I'll go back to evaluation because that's sort of what I'm drawn to, what I have maybe most experience in. There is so much value in themes and, patterns. And there is also, I'm someone who like, if I do 50 interviews or the team does 50 interviews and there's one person who says something that doesn't, right, there's the outlier, right? Let's call it the
Mhm,
outlier,
mhm.
obviously use that term. Like, I want to, maybe we can't go deep on that, but like that's so important to me, and I will always be the one to advocate for that. I hope I'm always the one to advocate for that person's story or experience, right? So in some ways this has come up, right, with funders. Oh, look, 98% of our grantees said, we were an awesome funder, we did this amazing, and there was this one person who had this really negative experience, and we don't want to discount that, right? We don't know, maybe we don't know the full story or the circumstances behind that, but like that person's story matters, right? So I will both advocate for like, the overview sort of, and the personal experience, the anecdotes and stories that people bring. I think we cannot lose sight of that. So that's something that maybe sets me apart as like an evaluator or storyteller, writer, etc. And then I think another one is collaboration, right? My work, the way I do my work, the way I talk to people and form relationships is really iterative, right? So I know some people who can sort of like go in, get the information and like do what they need to do behind the scenes and put a product back. And that is not me, right? We're going to work together. I'm hopefully not going to waste your time, right? But not too many meetings, but we are going to explore things together and talk them through. And even though I work mostly on my own right now, you as my client are my co-collaborator, right? We are in this together. We are going to do something that's meaningful and has meaning for your organization and the folks you represent or are accountable to. So what are some of the ways I hold true to that? I think being really upfront about what I expect from myself and what I expect from you, and also having like, even if it's only for you as a practitioner or consultant or a business owner, having those red lines like written down, right? Like, or having a plan. What am I going to do if things get to here? I left a contract last year that was very toxic. That was a loss in money for me. It was a great organization. It was not for me. It was not serving me. It was causing a lot of stress, personally in my family life. And I left it, right? What are you going to do when things don't? Because inevitably something's going to happen. Like, what are you going to do? And so for me, as like someone with a background in conflict resolution, right, having a plan or a set of practices that you put in place. Are you going to try a mediation? Are you going to do X, Y, Z? As a social worker, right? Don't get caught off guard when people or organizations don't live up to your values, because they won't, because we're all human, and you have to know sort of what to do, what you will stand for and what you won't. And so I think another thing for me that's really important there is the power of relationships. So if I have a relationship with you as a client, again, it doesn't have to be a friend. We don't have to know each other before, but if we've established working norms, if we've been genuine with each other, I'm much more likely to come to you to say, hey, let's talk this out or let's work this out, than I am with someone who has shown they're not, they're not gonna engage with me that way. And so I think it's just much easier to deal with problems when they come up, and they do come up when you're like a genuine human being.
Don't be surprised when things happen in organizations when they don't live up to the values. That happens. But the question to if folks who are listening to this, okay, I really feel it goes back to a lot of what you were saying earlier around questioning again, why me? What is it about my experiences that have led me to this place? Just being really in touch with your whys behind that. So when those things happen, folks who are listening, what are the practices of conflict resolution? What steps am I willing to go through to try to resolve this? And then also, what are some of those lines for me that hit at my values that are, these are things that I'm firmly committed to, commitments to myself even. So just thinking about some of those things as you are listening to the storytelling. Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing that. Over the course of your experiences, what's a memory or an experience or a noticing even, just something that you've experienced or come across that has reminded you or affirmed you like, yeah, this is why I do the work that I do.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate that there've been a lot, and it doesn't necessarily even speak to my own work as it does to finding the right people in the right place and the right causes. But one that comes to mind is from a few years ago. So at this point, I was a program officer at a foundation working with communities, which stands for Black, African, Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and South Asian. So not only post 9/11, but folks who have been impacted by the security state, etc. And I was at the foundation for about 5 years, very meaningful experience, and shaped a lot of my analysis and work going forward. And I remember this was 2021, and it was right the year prior to me leaving and then going to a consulting firm. But it was coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. I'm going to age myself a little bit, but I was in middle school when 9/11 happened. I went to middle school in McLean, Virginia, like basically across the road from the CIA, and down the street, if you will, a few miles from Penn. And shaped so much of not only our mental frameworks and experiences growing up, but also the industry around being around the country and our world. Very so huge formative experience. I wasn't Muslim then; I became Muslim by choice, but just a very formative experience for all of us, right, in different ways. But it was coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We were working with folks hugely impacted by that. And we did a lot of exploration at the foundation, like, okay, is this something, like, do you want to sort of draw attention to a negative event in service of, it was in service of highlighting the impacts on the Memphis communities. And myself and, this was a team effort, but myself and a few others there in consultation with our grantees and other folks in that field, no, we have to talk about this, right? Yes, it was a negative event in terms of the folks who did it, the impacts on our communities, etc. But like there is so much storytelling, looking backwards, looking forward, how the community has changed, empowerment,
Yeah.
civic engagement, all these things, political process, like so much has just happened, policy. And so anyway, we did a lot of programming, funder briefing events, fundraising, stuff with the grantees, etc. But one of the most impactful things that I was involved in, I still like carry very closely, is I worked with some consultants and some grantees to, I didn't write or anything, but to get the funding for, and I helped curate the group and hold the space and all that. And this group ultimately worked with a couple representatives to get a resolution introduced in the House around the impacts of like the post 9/11 security state on our communities. And again, it's not a law, it's a resolution, right? It's not binding, it's suggesting things, right? There should be a committee to look into this. We need to close Guantanamo, right? That's like a 20+ year fight. And a lot of people were just like, well, it's a resolution, it doesn't really matter. Like, we're going to do anything, it's not binding. And for me, what I kept holding, and I still hold in my work, this value of if it means something to someone, it's meaningful, right? It didn't do anything, but the fact that we could get that introduced in 2021, I think it was Representative Jayapal introduced it. That's the type of work I want to do. Maybe it's not changing a policy in the next 20 years. Maybe it's not quote unquote changing the world, but it's standing up for what people believe in and know to be true and right. And it's not the type of impact per se that people think about, maybe, but it's meaningful to the community and it's empowering. And so I think those are the types of things that I'm so proud and grateful to, that I look to as I continue my work.
It means something to the community, so it means something. Again, it takes me back to some of your earlier sharing too, that because that was one of the questions too that I remember hearing from you. It's like, okay, and so, and not only what is your why you at this time, why are you doing this work, but then also, what if the results of your efforts don't turn out in a particular way? Then what now? And in your response, it feels like that's one of the answers you arrived at. If it means something to someone, if it means something to the community, it's important. Very similarly
Yeah.
to how when you talked about in consulting too, you know, hey, 98% or however large percent may say this is a great experience, but then there's this other person or there's a smaller number that's saying that they had a different experience. And then sometimes, I mean, you and I know, like sometimes that can also correlate to like there could be identity, there could be, aspects of oppression involved there that don't often get spotlighted. And so yeah, it is very important to elevate those messages too.
One thing I would add to that is like understanding your place in the ecosystem is one of the things this taught me, right? So I've always struggled throughout my career with like, I'm not a frontline activist organizer person. I'm just not. Like, it's not who I am. It's not my personality. It's not where my skill set is. And doing the exploration to understand where your skill set is and then owning that and growing into it. It's not to say you can't change over time. Lots of people have career changes or even with us in the same sector. But like they're all valuable, right? And I think sometimes, a lot of times in social justice, we think of like the sexy organizer, policy, advocacy person, this and that. And like we disregard the people who are working in finance or administration who are keeping these things going, right? Fundraising. For me, it's been more of the behind the scenes, right? In program officer or as a consultant, right? I'm not in the halls of Congress, right? But I'm helping maybe get the funding or some of the ideas, or I'm bringing a group together who don't know each other, right? Playing a connector role, that kind of thing. So, I think really valuing and not discounting whatever your work is, because we need all of those people and no one is like higher in the hierarchy, right? All these personalities we read about in history or, all the people who changed the world, there were systems behind this, right? To be able to do that. And so even if you're not the person, you're part of that system. And that's really important.
Understanding your role, and that's okay. Recognizing what our strengths are, where the best areas we can be of service are, and really headed in that direction. It's all right. We don't have to be the person out in front, and that the
the visible work, just recognizing there's a lot of different roles to play and that are also important as well. So I appreciate you sharing that. You talked a little bit about things that have shaped you. This is just a moment to consider. It could be people, books, movements, events, other things that have been significant to you on your journeys that have informed how you show up today in your work.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a nerd, a lot of a nerd, so I'm like a big book person, history, that kind of thing. So, and it changes through time, like depending on what I'm thinking about or doing. But so a lot of these people are like authors and scholars. One is Haraziz. She talks about like the racial Muslim, and she's a scholar. I think she's at Rutgers. She talks a lot about the intersection of race and faith and how in intersectionality, like the particularity of the Muslim community structure out Muslim women, and has influenced both my own understanding of uni and my place in it, and also in the scholarly perspective on my work on my PhD. Khalid Beidin is another scholar who is similar things as Heresy. I mentioned the Baha'i sort of lists them. And then I think, one person like currently who I am just the biggest appreciator and fangirl of is Dr. Omar Sinan. He was a the Institute in Texas, very outspoken or scholar, and brings a lot, just a wonderful listening speaker who brings a lot of those faith, racial justice, social justice themes into many of the historical fight stations, and John Paul Lederoff, moral imagination, thinking about how we can transcend and be imaginative in places of desperation, right? Be creative about the solutions we propose, whether it's in peace building and social justice. Muhammad Ali, nothing like, just letting disrespect and love for the ways, again, they gave up, it's a massive gave up his life for, just giving up so much in the service of what was right and just, deeply unapologetic. And, yeah, I mean, look at all doing the right thing, look at all it brought them in their lives. It was just, the utmost bravery. So yeah, so many people to look up to. And again, it changes the thing reading or listening to it, but yeah, thinking about a lot about those.
I think you talked a little bit about this when you mentioned the social change ecosystem and finding your place in it. But yeah, what do you hope listeners will learn or take away from your story? And then what actions would you encourage them to take?
I think not being afraid to really explore yourself and what is true to you, and not being afraid to change, whether that's in your career or your personal life, leaning into those differences. The more and more I do that self exploration and think about who I am and what my place is and what I want to do, the stronger I get. And the more outspoken I get. I'm a generalist. I'm not a specialist in anything. So yeah, shout out to the generalist. It's hard. It's
Shout
hard
out
when
to
you
the
have to write a
generalist.
cover letter. Yeah. Or talk about your impact in a specific area, and you're like, I have 10 different areas, or I'm okay at 10 different things, right? I don't have a, but leaning into that, and again, finding your place in the social justice ecosystem, and being proud of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Shout out to the generalists. Shout out to the multi-potentialite folks out there who know a lot about a lot of things and a little about a lot of things and a lot about a lot of things. So shout out to you all up there. I have 3 finish the statement prompts, Claire. I'll just say a statement and then you just finish the sentence. It's a snapshot in time. Your answers could change if I say this or ask you later, but at least for right now, finish the statement. True social justice is possible when.
It's hard. Okay. One is humility. When there's humility, when we all sort of get off our pedestals and start fighting each other and thinking we're the best at what we do and no one else can do it. So I think humility needs to be injected into our social movement. The other one is, what was I going to say? Oh, dignity. I think people cannot be truly peaceful or liberated or many of those things without a sense of dignity. And that's also missing.
My approach to social justice is shaped by
many things. I will say faith and community and history. I will say history.
history. Understanding and sharing our social justice origin stories is important because
My daughter narrative person, meaning I don't like study narrative or have a deep expertise, but I believe that stories are all we have. We are seeing right now in the federal government web pages being taken down that house information that's critical, whether it's like vaccines or women's health or, even if we don't use the word DEI, right? Racial equity work. And one of the ways we can fight disinformation or lack of information is through more information, through more storytelling, through more voices getting out there to counter that.
I'm hoping these stories will outlast us. And so there's any advice or wisdom you'd want to pass along to future generations who may come across these recordings, what would you want to tell them? What would you want them to know?
There's two things, and I think they're sort of quotes, if you will. They're both related. One, my paternal grandmother, I don't think she made up this quote, but in fact, I don't know who said it originally, but she was a big fan of the phrase "bloom where you're planted." So I think it goes back to my sharing about dreams and finding your place and just growing into your circumstance and in your own journey and owning that, I think will bring you the most authentic and effective work and be the most meaningful. And the other one also related to like planting in nature. I'm a nature person too. So there's a saying of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I think it's one of his sayings, or it's just a quote, but about this idea that if sort of like, and I don't mean to end on a dark note, but it's beautiful. Like if the end comes, and every day now it feels like the end is coming, but if the end comes, like, and you're planting a seed, right? You're planting a tree, like go continue plant it anyway. And this idea that like, even if something horrible is happening or is coming or surrounding you, go ahead and do that good deed, even if it's not going to be there, right? Like, so this idea that we're doing things now, we're laying the groundwork, we're helping with policy change and social change and all the things. And next year or this year or in 50 years, it may be rolled back and changed, or people may undo our work, but we may never know what the result is, but do it anyway, right? And because it's the right thing to do, it's the just thing to do. And like, there's no other way to do things, right? I mean, I go back to my friends, like there's no other way to live in this world than to sort of do good and just. That's all we have.
If you could put a title on your social justice origin story, what would you call it?
I like the idea of like when my grandmother said like bloom where you're planted. I just love that. I mean, it's just like coming back and evolving, going, changing. Being part, like plants don't grow alone. They're also in part of a natural setting. They're a part of that, the earth and the elements and so I just love that.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you for believing in this project. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Yeah, thanks for being with me. Bloom where you're planted.
Thank you so much.
Clara Downing.
Yes,
everybody.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to Social Justice Origin Stories there or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch video episodes on YouTube at Social Justice Origin Stories, and I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. Video episodes are also available on the project website, socialjusticeoriginstories.com. I'd love to hear about how you're engaging with the stories. Share your thoughts at socialjusticeoriginstories.com/contact or by emailing stories@socialjusticeoriginstories.com. To support the work of Social Justice Origin Stories, consider becoming a monthly patron. Your contributions will help keep this resource going and support its mission. Visit patreon.com/socialjusticeoriginstories to learn more and to make a contribution. Again, that's patreon.com/socialjusticeoriginstories. You can start or stop anytime. Social Justice Origin Stories is edited, hosted, and produced by me, Rolando Tompkins Jones. Many thanks to our storyteller this week and the many storytellers who have contributed to this project. And thank you for joining me this week. Take care.